Often we are inclined to look at the Ten Commandments as some natural law handed down by God to instruct all peoples in how to live with God and with neighbor. Last Sunday, as we began this exploration of the Ten Commandments, I sought to trim away at this perspective just a bit. The Ten Commandments are primarily for God's people, I proposed. The people whom God brought up out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of slavery. And I propose that our response to these commandments is not one of obligation or duty, but a response of gratitude. For we too have been saved and set free, delivered by God. I offer that these commandments are not here primarily to make us moral people, but they are to define and shape our relationship with God Himself. And if this relationship with God is to be defined by loving God with all that we are, heart, soul, and might, then we also express this love of God by loving our neighbors. For many years, on many occasions, I have offered you this mantra for living by faith. In matters of faith, we do not get there alone. We get there together. I do not get there without you, and you do not get there without me. When we finally meet God, I anticipate that God will say to us, "Where? Where are the others?" When it comes to loving God and belonging to God, we are in this together, you and me. And this, I believe, is the thrust of the commandments we will engage today. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. To me, these two commandments stand as a hinge between the first commandments, the Lord our God, we shall worship Him, and how we come to live and love with our neighbor. Standing before that smoking and rumbling mountain, the Israelites, still with vivid memories of back-breaking and life-sapping labor demanded by the Pharaoh, must have asked each other, "Is that truly what we heard? Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh is a Sabbath unto the world, to the Lord. You shall do no work, you, nor your son or your daughter, or your male or your female slaves, or your animals, or even the alien resident living among you." This was unheard of in the land of the Pharaoh. A day of rest. A God with such abundance that one did not have to work, but one could cease working and rest for a day. A day with no work for anyone. No work for the rich, no work for the poor. No work for the slave and no work for the free. No work for males or females, chosen people or aliens, or even animals. As I mentioned earlier, God did not make anything in all of creation holy. A mountain, a river, a valley. But in this commandment, God makes time holy. God says we are to remember the Sabbath day and to keep it as a Sabbath unto the Lord. This commandment reminds us that our time is not ours. It is not our possession. Time, just like life itself, is a gift unto us from God. And with this commandment, we are informed that God holds us accountable for how we use this time. For 6 days, we may work. We may pursue our agendas, follow our ambitions. We may create things and make things. We may formulate and implement strategies. We may produce and sell things. We may serve and care for people. But on the seventh day, we are commanded to rest. Hallelujah. As the old preachers say, can I get an amen? On the seventh day, we are commanded to rest. Can you imagine the smiles that must have broken across the faces of those former slaves? Can you imagine the joy that must have pulsated through their bodies once tortured by hard labor? A day of rest, a day freed of labor, a day when everyone forgets their to-do list. Now, they said, this is a gift from God we can truly appreciate and celebrate. This morning, I would have you notice in that list of commandments that the commandment to remember the Sabbath day is the longest of the 10. It is the most precise in describing how we are to implement this Sabbath day. And then we are told that this day of rest is grounded and formulated in God's own being. God made heaven and earth, land and sea, and all that is in them. 6 days He did this work, but according to Genesis, on the seventh day, God rested. I would ask you this morning, if God, the Creator of all things, rested, how in heaven's name do we, God's creatures, believe that we can get along without rest? This commandment reveals to us how God intends for the world itself to work. For 6 days you labor, on the seventh day you rest. For it is in this way that God intends for life to be enjoyed. See, the seventh day is not intended to be a day of relief, a day when we throw back into our exhaustion and say, thank God I don't have any work to do today. But this seventh day, this Sabbath day, is supposed to be a day of joy. As the psalmist says, this is the day that the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. The way our week, the way our work is fulfilled is to rest. God created. God saw that His creation was good. God rejoiced in that He could create a whole world and everything in it and remain fully God, Lord of all creation. And then God rested. When we remember the Sabbath day and we keep it by resting, we remind ourselves that we are not in control in this life. Despite all of our fantasies, none of us possess the power just to make things happen, no matter how long or hard we work. The seventh day reminds us that it is not up to us to make everything right. By remembering to rest, we are expressing our trust in God. Even God believed that He could rest. God believed that everything would be all right. The sun, the moon, the stars, the earth, the seas, the animals, if He simply rested on the Sabbath day, the seventh day. God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Jesus, is not like the Greek god Atlas, who bore the whole world on his shoulders. The commandment says to us that we can indeed be like God. We can rest. If we rest, we will not be ruined. If we rest, the world will not go to hell in a handbasket. If we rest, God sustains all that is. It seems like after all these years, we would come to recognize that in some of our dreaming and our planning and our organizing and our doing, we create enough havoc through 6 days. We need to let the world itself rest from our manipulation at least one day a week. The Sabbath draws us together too as a human family. The rich who are anxious and worried about many things. The poor who have to hustle just to get by. Even the animals, they receive a day of rest, a day God has commanded. In preparing this series of sermons, and particularly preparing this sermon for today on the Sabbath, I have found myself convicted that my refusal to rest at times is a sign of my failure to trust God. Perhaps that troubles you too. That the inability to rest, to lay things aside, to give yourself room to breathe and restore yourself, represents a problem trusting God. That you, like me perhaps, somehow believe that you can make things happen. That somehow we have to keep the world spinning around and round. That we have to go out and work hard 24/7 just to make sure that our lives will be secure. Somehow in refusing to rest, perhaps we think that we are indispensable to the places where we work and the people around us. Perhaps in unwillingness to rest, we're simply saying that we do not believe God is able to provide for us what we need. And our failure to rest may keep us from nurturing a life before God. If we work all the time, when do we worship God? If we work all the time, when do we step back and look at the priorities of our lives, put them in proper perspective, and cull away the ones that are not worth doing? I wonder myself if our refusal to rest, our refusal to embrace this divine gift of rest, means that we have truly violated the first commandments, that we have made of ourselves gods. We believe that we are Lord of our lives and not Yahweh. 6 days, God says we may work. On the seventh day, we are to rest. God rested. We too must rest. And now we come to that other hinge between the commandments about God and the commandments directed toward our neighbor. That commandment is honor your father and your mother. I must confess that in many ways I believe that this is the most abused of all of the commandments that we have. It has been abused because we usually directed solely at children. We use it to demand obedience from our children without considering our words, our actions, our values, without seeing if we ourselves are worthy for such a demand of obedience from those whose lives are dependent upon us in the family. I would venture to remind everyone this morning that the commandment says, honor our parents. It does not say to obey our parents. Although obeying our parents at times can be honoring them, just as disobeying our parents can too be in a way of honoring them. And I'll say more about that later. I want to impress upon you this morning that this commandment, when it was first offered, given, was proclaimed to adults, specifically in a patriarchal society, to male adults. When it speaks of honoring father and mother, its primary focus is adult children honoring aging parents. Again, this is not intended to be so much about obligation as it is to be about gratitude for the gift of life. Families, if they play no other role for us in our lives, they remind us that we do not live unto ourselves. We are connected. We are for a very long time dependent upon someone else. It takes 9 months for an infant to take shape in the mother's womb. Human beings are dependent upon the care of their parents longer than any other animal God created. Each one of us has been parented by someone. Our parents may have had all kinds of strengths and weaknesses, challenges and liabilities. Our experience may define that we had good parents or bad parents. We had parents who did the best they could with what they had. We had parents who couldn't get over themselves long enough to parent us as their children. We've had parents who stood alongside us, and we've had parents who abandoned us. There are all kinds of parents. Yet we don't get here without parents. We all carry a mark at the very center of our bodies that is with us for all our days that reminds us that we received life through someone else. We are dependent on others. This is a reality that you and I cannot escape no matter how desperately we want to. This relationship between parent and child is a relationship of ultimate significance. I have a friend who is a social worker. And many times across his career, he's had to go in homes to take a child from its mother and father where the child has been neglected or abused. He tells me he has never taken a child from his or her mother's arms that did not hold as tightly around that mother's neck as it could, did not cry for that mother, and as he pulled the child away, the child lunged back toward that mother, no matter how indifferent or apathetic or abusive that mother had been. This relationship between parent and child is absolutely primal. It is the first relationship of life you and I know. How many of us here today are still trying to please mama or daddy? How many of us here today are still trying to stick it to mama or daddy? Yet here in these 10 words, we are commanded to honor mother and father. And I pay attention to you that this is the only commandment that comes with a promise, so that we may live long in the land that God is showing us. I said a moment ago, I believe at the heart of this commandment we would find gratitude. Often I walk through senior adult parents who are going through transitions in their lives, and their greatest fear, their absolute greatest fear, is that they should inconvenience their adult children in some way. They don't want to be a bother or a burden. They don't want to cause their children to change their plans or interrupt their lives in any way because of them. I've heard this song 1,000 times, and this is usually my reply. My reply to this senior parent goes like this: I guess you never changed a diaper. I guess you never got up in the middle of the night to attend a sick child. I guess you never sacrificed anything you wanted or desired so that your child could have something they desperately wanted. As children, we cannot say thank you to our parents for changing our diapers, but when they become elderly, we can say thank you to them by caring for them when they can no longer do all the things for themselves that they once did. In this parent-child relationship of honor, we cannot be indifferent to our parents' needs, nor can our parents use this commandment to make impossible demands upon us. It's about honor and respect. Somewhere in my study for this series, I came across an interpretation of the Hebrew for this commandment which said we might translate it this way: do not treat your mother and father shabbily. Do not treat your mother and father shabbily. I think for most of us, no expansion of that word is needed: shabbily. Now I want to go back to father and mother relationship with their children. Parents, it's imperative that you provide for your children what they need. If at all humanly possible, a child should not have to be anxious about food to eat, clothes to wear, a bed to sleep in, a safe place in which they are sheltered. And they should be, for as long as possible, sheltered from the harshest realities of life that almost undo us as adults. I remember many years ago when Katie Couric was still on Today Show, there had been a devastating earthquake in Nepal. She was interviewing a very famous child psychiatrist. She asked him, "What do I tell my children when they see all these images of death and destruction on our television?" He replied to her, "Katie, it is your responsibility to keep your children away from the television. It's your responsibility to shield your children from the death and devastation that comes across the picture screen." Children should be assured of a parent's abiding love. Love should not be conditional. If one hears, "I love you when," or "I love you if," or "I love you but," the child knows that love is conditional. And parents, this is what I learned being a parent. That at least for the first 16 years of both of my sons' life, it took a significant investment of self and energy and time that had to come from me. It couldn't come from anyone else. But I also learned that it was absolutely critical to surround yourself with people who would provide for your son or your daughter guidance and wisdom and friendship and affirmation and blessing. Because no matter how hard we try, we cannot do it all. As parents, we have a responsibility to teach, to guide, to impart wisdom and love to our children. One dimension of this teaching and guidance and wisdom as love is to introduce them to God. More and more these days, I encounter a critical mistake in the way moms and dads go about introducing their children to God. They say to me they want that decision to be a personal decision that the child chooses on their own. I'm not going to let my children do anything like that in any other arena of life. I'm not going to throw them into the world to make it on their own. I'm going to provide all the wisdom, all the guidance, all the help that I can. Why is it when we come to the relationship with God, we act as if it's an open door? I know we live in a time when we want everyone to make all their decisions on their own as if we are not connected to anyone. But moms and dads, there is a thing called parental authority. We have been entrusted with the care of our children. We cannot abdicate that responsibility, nor can we abdicate our parental authority. We must teach them. Many years ago, I was with a Sunday school class that had decided to go to the horse park in Lexington to the Symphony Pops. The whole class decided to do it. We were all getting loaded up to go, and one family showed up without their boys who were 9 and 11. When Ken came up, I said, "Ken, where's the boys?" "Oh, they said they didn't like the symphony." Now, I don't accept answers like that readily. Have they ever seen a symphony? No. Well, how in heaven's name would they know whether they like it or not? And yet we often treat this very important responsibility to nurture our children in the faith, to introduce them to God. In the first passage read from Deuteronomy this morning, the Shema, we are to teach it to our children, we are told. Honor your father and your mother. It can be done even among the most difficult circumstances, even when you don't know enough to understand. My mother was unable to give her children the things that they needed. As a child, I did not know that. And so I tried to honor her by pleasing her, by being everything that I thought she wanted to be. But as I grew older, I came to understand that my mother did not know who she was. And she did not know what she wanted her world to be like. And she did not know truly what she wanted me to be like. In 2000, I honored my mother. I took her to a hospital where she could be evaluated medically, emotionally, and psychologically. And I left her there for 6 weeks. At the conclusion of that 6 weeks, my family, we had a meeting with a psychiatrist responsible for her care. And out of that meeting, we learned that my mother had a diagnosis of a personality disorder that sounded like it was this long. The psychiatrist asked us, "Do you know when this change happened?" And everyone in the room, my father, my brother, our wives, my aunt, we said 1975. My mother had this problem long before 1975, but in 1975 her life came to a standstill. Now, it would have been wonderful if someone had told me that my mother was doing the best that she could do because she was suffering from a personality disorder. I do believe getting her into that hospital, I was honoring her. And after learning about that diagnosis, I related to her differently, not attending to her illness, but trying to call her toward life. And it was tough. She didn't like it. A lot of things that were said that were hurtful. But I honored her by not always doing what she told me to do. In her situation, I honored her by disobeying her, by not repeating the awful things she wanted me to tell others that she loved and she believed were neglecting her. It also allowed me to realize how much my father had given to protect me from those aspects of my mother's personality that were beyond his control and everyone's control. And so I honored him by giving him thanks for sheltering me when I didn't realize I need sheltering. And I was able to honor my mother by forgiving her for what she was unable to give me because she was doing the best that she could do with what she had. Honoring mother and father does not come because we have idyllic relationships with our parents. It is found in the nutty, routine, chaos of ordinary days living together in family. The reason it's such a struggle is because there is no place on earth where we are more intimately known than within our families. That's why it's such a struggle. That's why there's so many highs and so many lows. That's why we live so many days in not knowing what to say or what to do, because there in family we are known so well. So, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Rest. Remember to turn toward God for life. Honor your father and your mother. Remember that for all of your life you are connected to someone, dependent upon someone. Make that relationship one in which people are not treated shabbily, but with honor. The commandments today are a little touchy, I think, because they touch us all. You can say, I've never murdered, I've never stolen, I've never borne false witness in court against my neighbor. But there are not many of us here this morning who cannot say that we took rest at appropriate times according to the commandment, or when honoring mother and father was farther from us than it should be. These commandments, I think, in the middle, touch us at the deepest intimacy of our lives about ourselves and our relationship, where we are most vulnerable. But remember, they are the way to life. These commandments